And hello everyone, and welcome to episode 6. Now you guys won't feel this, but I certainly do. I have a very strong feeling of deja vu. And you want to know why? Because I'm awesome. I've actually recorded this episode once before. I even have the finished pages all done because I've just finished, well, not just, but I finished recording the episode, and I did a stupid, guys. I did a major stupid. I recorded the whole episode and my mic wasn't plugged in. You know, guys, sometimes I just amaze myself with how, good I am at this stuff. I'm just an expert, and you can clearly tell. So, I'm gonna try and not gripe on about it too much. It probably wasn't a good episode anyway. I've salvaged some of the footage, even though it's all without any sound, which makes it, basically useless. But I've kept some of the visuals, and I'm gonna employ that here. I'm going to try to go over this episode again and maybe make it better than the first time I recorded it. Also, since a lot of people have been asking and I feel that the method I've set up is a little confusing, I'm going to quickly run through exactly how you can submit your artwork to the show in case you want to get it critiqued. So what you do is that in case you stumble across any of my videos, every single one has the exact same description, so the link will always be there. What you do is that you go to one of the episodes, any one, doesn't matter, you open the description, and down here you'll find a link. It's right here under links, right here. If you would like to submit your artwork to be critiqued, please go submit your art here. You open the link, right? And the link will be taking you to my Tumblr. Right here. Okay? So not only will it take you to Tumblr, but it's going to take you to the Tumblr/submit tab. Now this tab right here is for just in case you want to submit your artwork. Here are my terms of service. Basically this just says what I will and will not do, what I would like, any specifications I have about my drawings, and basically anything that isn't listed here is acceptable. And if anything you send me isn't acceptable, I'll just let you know in a private message. So once you've got the file you want to send me, all you gotta do is go here, and then you set the submission to photo, and then you take out your files, you drag and drop the file that you want, and then you add any comments of your choosing to the picture, and then you send it to me and press submit. If you don't have a Tumblr, that's alright. You can log out or log in with anything you have, or use your Yahoo email. That'll work just fine. Yahoo, Gmail works just as well. And any emails you send me will be completely private, of course. Also, one last detail that I want, two things that I want to mention about this real quick. One thing, don't trust Tumblr to always send me the pictures. Yes, it's really nice when people send it to me within the post, but then sometimes it actually won't work, and Tumblr won't actually, let the picture load in my inbox. So whenever you send it to me, it'll just be perpetually loading and I can never actually open it. So if you send me a picture, please send me an external link, whether that be through a DeviantArt or through a Tumblr or an Instagram, but just another place where I can go and see the picture. Because I can't always trust Tumblr to actually send me the original image, or at least be good enough to get me the image. So any link to a DeviantArt or something would be perfect. That way I can have the link to go reference as well. Also, this would give me the opportunity to have your DeviantArt or any other handle, so that way I can contact you. Which leads me into my second point, which is that if you want me to notify you personally and let you know, or go out of my way to tag you or let you know that I finished, then please give me a method of contacting you. If you submit it with your email, I don't know if I want to personally email that to you, because I don't know if I'd be doing that, but it would be better if you simply leave me a message connected to the image and say, hey, you can contact me through my DeviantArt or whatever, so that way I can personally tag you and let you know that I'm finished and done your artwork. Otherwise, I won't know. And there have been a couple of pieces that sadly, if you've submitted them only by submitting the image, I have not been able to open them, so please, please, please ask everybody to please either resubmit or double check that I got it by either messaging me and making sure that I did. I just need to make sure that everybody's able to do this. And again, if you cannot or you don't want to use this submission method, or you don't want to have to go to one of my episodes to do it, you can go right here to my main page on my YouTube profile, and my Tumblr's linked right here. You can go here and then go to the submission page, which has its own little button, or you can go to any other of my plugins and they're all going to be there. I hope this was helpful, and remember that if you have any other questions about this part, please let me know in the comments. Alright, so finally jumping into this piece, because I'm actually quite eager to go over this again, because I feel my advice I gave in the first take, even though it was lost, was not as concise or as constructive as it could have been, so I'm going to go over this again, hopefully to be more constructive. The first thing that strikes me about this picture is the colors. Now, my interpretation of this image is that it looks like a DeviantArt ID of some sort, and with the paintbrushes and the paint in your hair and you being all happy and the heart with the colors on it, I interpreted this as a loving color artist kind of ID. And it's supposed to be happy and bubbly and introducing yourself to the world as an artist. That's my interpretation. I don't know exactly what this picture represents, but that's what I'm going to go with, because that's my educated guess. Speaking strictly about the colors, my first issue is the color with the skin and the color of the background. If you take the skin and you separate it from the background, just like pull it aside, right? And then you take the color of the background, you see how these really contrast. And the more you stare at this, the more it kind of hurts your eyes. Not because it looks bad, but because the colors are so close together, yet not quite there, and really doesn't accentuate the drawing. With something like this, you really want to kind of take a much darker look, a much darker background, so that way the background doesn't actually subtract from the piece, but instead kind of brings it out. I would go with a purple, since that's I personally really love the color purple. I feel it's a very nice neutral. I feel that it helps bring a piece out, but although that's my own biased opinion. Again, this is just a very simple edit. It's not perfect. You can see with the now purple background, it really brings out the skin more, the face is more centralized, and that green was just, like when you take it away and put it back, you realize just how strong that green was and how it was really just kind of blending away with the skin. With this darker color, you can actually bring it out more, and it's much friendlier looking than before. This problem of two colors contrasting or just coming close enough to be like almost the same but not quite there yet is a common problem in this piece. Like another place where it's really obvious is here in the hair piece. This bit here, I didn't even see it the first time I looked at it because the hair piece was almost the same color as the brush. Like you can see, like if I open up my color wheel here and you see me going between them, you can see there's not much difference. This is only slightly more red and this is more yellow. The problem with that is that because the colors are so close together, this blends away into this, and then you just kind of have this weird blue dot here. I didn't even know what this was until I came close and realized, oh, it was the hair. You gotta watch for colors that come too close for comfort. That's what I like to call it. I had a similar problem when I was younger, where I would make the skin and eye color and hair color of whoever I was drawing so close to each other, but for some reason I couldn't like put down as to why the picture didn't look right. Or I'd make the colors so strong that they would kind of look the same. The way I fixed it, just for this piece or the sake of it, is just I've taken the blue that you've placed on the end of the hair and I've extended it all the way up so that way it defines itself from the brush, but it's still there so that way you still have your hair end. More of a nitpick and more to my preference regarding the colors, before we move on to a different point about this piece, is the symmetry in the piece overall and the symmetry with the colors. Now, like I said before, I interpret that this piece is talking about love of color, or love of color as an artist, or love of painting. And the thing with that is, when you look at this piece, you see how both her pigtails are extremely symmetrical, and both these are like the same color, and so are the paintbrushes. And to me, it looks like you really could have taken this piece to a much bigger place, or really made it like much more exciting and better looking if you had, instead of making it so symmetrical, just went with going with an asymmetrical look, so that way the piece looks more spontaneous and fun. Because with this kind of symmetry, it looks like you just kind of pasted and copied one side of the piece, and then just kind of put it on the other side, which I don't think you did, but it comes off that way, and you really don't want that, especially with a piece like this, because this is a really happy piece. And when you have that symmetry there, it really just takes away from like the spontaneous, happy peppiness of it. So what I think you should do for future pieces and for this sort of piece is avoid this sort of symmetry. Symmetry on pieces should not be happening unless it's some sort of cityscape, or in very rare instances. I can't think of any off the top of my head where it would be like forbidden, but it's a case-by-case basis thing more so. When it comes to things like faces or natural things like animals, you really want to avoid that symmetry because that never happens in reality. Now, I know I probably say this every episode, but I'd like to emphasize that you don't have to make things realistic to make them good, but they should have some basis in reality. And when it comes to things like faces, having over symmetry with a face really takes away from the beauty of the face, because the point of the face is that it's not symmetrical, is that it's different, and so on. And the thing about this piece in particular is that some parts of it are symmetrical, but then other parts are not. For example, this ear here, right, that you've added on this piece right here, it's on one side, but then when you look at the other end of the head, there's no ear there. And then the glasses are only slightly off to the side, despite them being supposed to be in the middle. Like, they're all, like, you've taken the glasses and you made them off-center, yet you don't do the same for everything else. Like, it's just kind of an inconsistency that bothers me. And I know it's kind of odd because I'm talking about don't add symmetry too much, but then again I'm saying, like, don't go crazy with not having symmetry, or just at least not have it where it needs to be. Just remember where it needs to be and where it shouldn't be. And when it comes to something like faces, things like eye symmetry, ear symmetry, and nostril symmetry are important, but things when it comes to like hair symmetry shouldn't be there, because hair is a free-flowing, like, textured thing. It doesn't make sense that hair be stagnant and perfectly symmetrical, because it's not. Your hair is thousands of fibers that grow out of your head. It doesn't make sense that they be symmetrical. One thing that I do think should most of the time be symmetrical is just the head shape, since a lopsided head tends to be kind of like a sore thumb for most people, and people tend to notice that right away. Or a head that's kind of lumpy. So you just kind of want to, like, if you ever have doubts about your drawing being like symmetrical in the wrong way, just flip the drawing backwards and then look at it, and then if you see anything that looks out of place or slightly uneven, then you just go in there and fix it like that. This isn't a perfect fix, I would like to clarify, but it's more to what I'm trying to elude rather than just show you by doing it here, because it's very hard to fix something on the go when you're talking and also fixing things. One thing that I definitely, one last thing before I go into like the major point of my critique, is this bit right here with the chest. Now, I understand this is a cartoon, and again, I'm not saying that everything has to be realistic, but these sort of very wide breasts are something that you really want to avoid unless you're making a much older woman. Now, I don't know the age of this particular artist. I'm assuming she's, I would guess the particular artist who made this piece would be 16-something years old. Here's the thing about that. For this kind of piece, you want to remember age signals. Age signals are basically when you have certain things that give off certain signs that say that a certain thing is a certain age. Now, when it comes to physical signs, if you see someone with wrinkles, you usually say, oh, that person must be old. Or if you see somebody who's who has like blackened teeth, you say, oh, that person smokes. The same thing applies to cartoons. Now, if you really compare the two, you notice how wide these breasts were. And wide breasts tend to be a much older woman, adult type thing to have. Because older women, when they get, older, obviously their breasts sag and they need to use like large or wider bras to keep their breasts up. So for me, that was kind of distracting. Once you've taken that away, the character looks much more youthful, and it looks much cuter, actually. I understand the width, why you gave it that width, because you want it to match up with the head, but again, realize that the wide chest like that will read as someone who's much, much, much older, and not adult, but more like into an aged thing. So just be careful and watch those age signals when you do that. One last thing I want to go over for this piece specifically is the eyes. Now, I've taken off let me quickly fix this here. I've taken off the glass because I noticed that the glass was extremely white saturated. Now, at first I didn't understand why, but then when I took the glass off, I realized why. The lids, or at least eyelids that you gave her, are very, very large. Now, this is supposed to be that her eyes are closed. She's squinting. But the thing is, the sheer size of these lids, even though they're supposed to be squinting, is massive. In fact, when I look at this, it looks like she has her eyes open because of the size that they have right now. Now, I understand that thick eyelids are like a cutesy style thing, and that's fine. I think that it's a cute thing as well. But what I do think is that you should try not to make them so thick that they get confused with regular eyes. And in this case, you want to try and make them small enough so that they resemble an eye that's closed, but not so small that they deviate. That's the word I was looking for. You want to make them thin enough so that they still resemble eyelids that are shut, but not so wide that they look like eyes. And you don't want to deviate from your style. It's just a happy medium. I'd go with something like this. I think this is the thickest you can go without it looking like an eye that's literally open. If you want to make double sure that nobody can confuse this for an eye, you can go in like this and kind of emphasize it. This is not perfect, again, but these edits are not meant to be perfect. I think I should clarify to people who watch that I'm not attempting to redo these drawings or fix every single problem with them. There will be instances where I go much farther with the critique or edit of a particular drawing to emphasize a point, but that's only because I feel that the lesson I'm trying to convey would be better conveyed visually through me actually working and fixing on the piece. If I were to just word out everything I say, then I feel that my rambling would take over and that what I'm trying to say would not come out as effectively. So for the sake of that, that's why sometimes I'll go farther with the editing, but I would like to clarify that I don't redo people's pieces. I merely take a piece and try to implement the technique that I'm trying to say so that people can understand it, imitate it, and do better in the future. So yeah, here you can see how big the eyes were and how much nicer they look when they're thinner. And as for the reflection on the glass, because the style that you're going for is a very vectory kind of style, I'm going to go with a very simple one line reflection on her glasses and then just bring the opacity down. I like the style you're going for. I think I've always envied very simple vector styles because I've never been able to imitate that myself. It's very difficult to do, and I'm glad that you're trying it. But I would just say, remember that certain things, even in a cartoon, will read as certain things. And while cartoons are exempt from certain rules when it comes to realistic stuff, like you don't have to always draw lips, you don't have to always draw like nostrils or something, I feel that when some things will just always read as certain things, and some things like large breasts and all will always read as older. And the thing is, you have to keep consistency, because this face reminds me of someone who's very young and youthful and beautiful, and someone who's very peppy and out there. You don't want that to read as an older, middle-aged woman. One last touch that I'd add, since this piece is supposed to be upbeat, would be maybe some cute pink cheeks. Although that's just my taste. This is not... You can discount this from the primary bits of the critique, since you could discount this and say, well, I didn't want it to be that way, and I would say, absolutely fine. That's good. I just personally think that this piece would have really been tied together if you had brought it out with some cute little red cheekness. And here's the final product. Now, most of what I say is subjective, of course. If you are not a fan of purple and it was your intention to have a more green and blue theme because those are colors that you enjoy, then you can keep the diversity that I mentioned down. Or if you really just enjoy those two colors, and those are like your primary favorites, you can keep it down to that. But this is more my suggestions. I just feel that overall the piece would pop more if the background was darker, accentuating the figure in the foreground, because the colors don't match as closely. But overall, this is a really strong piece. I think it's really cute. All I gotta say is just watch for age signals and over symmetry, and try not to make these eye slits so large. Because you can see now that since I've thinned them, you can see how, to me, these look like two black eyes instead of two eyes that are closed. Although I do see what you were going for, and I understand it's a style choice. But styles can be improved and enhanced from original bits. And there's some aspects of styles that can be better than others. But overall, this is a really nice piece. Thank you for submitting it to me, and keep up the good work. Now with this piece, I'm really happy that I got the submission. In fact, I've been looking at it for a long time because I was really eager to look at it, because it's just so beautiful and it's really moving. And I actually kind of felt bad to work on this one because I can see like what this person was going for, but I'm going to talk about it because there are some aspects of it that I feel could use improvement, but that overall are not like completely distracting. The shading is what you asked me about, that you want me to talk about, so I'll waste a little time talking about the rest of it and let you see what I did with the shading. I managed to salvage the footage from the first episode I recorded, where I merely recorded myself fixing it up, so you can see what I did, but let me explain why I will show you what I do, show you just, beforehand, so you understand my point of this. A few small things before that, though. One thing that I noticed right away about this piece that I wasn't really a fan of was this kind of stubble you were giving him. The reason is because the stubble itself doesn't look like stubble. Like, if you've ever seen stubble itself is very grainy. It's very, it's very small. It's like thousands of individual tiny hairs, and it looks odd when you have like just little small hairs. Now, I'm not saying don't give him stubble, but I'm just saying if you're going to draw in stubble, that you should really like disperse the stubble, and remember that it's actually many thousands of tiny small hairs. Like, imagine if you were to look at this character, right, and then you were to see this sort of stubble looking thing you've got going on here. Now, I'm not saying this kind of stubble could never work, because there are styles that do work, like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo or something like that. But here's the thing, with the level of detail you've taken with your style, it wouldn't make sense to suddenly like go for a more simplistic style and simply add in like 1 or 2 stubble hairs. Like, if you've taken the detail of giving him lips and giving him a proper chin and all that, why not go all the way and just give him proper stubble? Now, this is a very small edit, but you'll see what I mean in a minute. But basically, if you were to give him more proper stubble, right, what you would do is you would go here with multiply. I don't know exactly what program you have, but I'm going to assume it's one similar to the one I'm using today, so like Clip Studio or SciPaint. And what I would do is I would take one of these texture brushes, which you should have in Paint Tool Sci, which makes something like this, and then do something like this, which is where it makes like a texture on him that you could say looks like his scruff, right? And then you could go in there with an eraser and then erase the excess, or pin it down to the exact layer. I don't have the layered version of this, so I have to work with what I've got, but for me, this looks much more natural, and it looks much more like it's stubble. Like, before I thought it was like spines or markings on his face, but now this is much more reminiscent to me of stubble. Of course, you don't go stubble on your own hair or your ear, but you get the idea. And then you can go in there with a soft eraser and then erase the excess that you don't need, such as that bit on his lip, this bit right here, or this right here. I prefer erasing with a smaller version of the texture brush. That way that the texturing isn't like lost, and actually it emphasizes it a little bit. Something like this. Now you can see I messed with it a little bit, and I blended it away into his face, and now it looks like he has more stubble. You can see that the stubble I've put on him looks more like what you would see on his face. Let's go here. One other thing is that, hold on, let me fix this real quick. Alright, there we go. So here's the thing. One other thing is, like, the same problem that applied with the stubble also applies to her freckles. It's not quite as prominent, and this might be interpreted as more as a nitpick, so please bear with me. But here's the thing. You see the freckles are going on to over her eye. Now, I don't personally have freckles, and I understand freckles can extend all the way up here, but for someone as young as her, I don't think that would be the case. Also, they look a little too sorted, like you went individually and just kind of poked on the freckles, but I feel that if they were more dispersed, or like differently sized, that it would look more natural on her face, or look more more appealing to her face. Like, I really like the idea of having little freckles and so on, but like if you just like disperse them more, or like made them less like I don't know, synchronized, I think they would look a little better. I like how you also, like, one side note, I like how you added the detail of giving the cheek line. Normally people don't do that with side views, and I'm guilty of this. I personally don't always do this because I think that it's unnecessary sometimes. But it's really nice that you did, and it's really awesome. And it definitely does show in your piece and look really nice. If you're using something like Psy, like I mentioned before, you can use a scatter brush or something similar to get the effect of freckles, or like freckles on the face. And you don't have to make them this dark or this color, but that's something I would do, and then you just fade them out like this, because freckles are varying in size and thickness and location, and you can just change the thickness and place it there. I'm questioning the size of this arm. Like, if you flip it backwards and you look here, and you were to take the shape and take it out, you would notice that the shoulder for some reason is quite thin, or like at least following this line here, and then this forearm is quite long. It just seems like her arm's a little long for that of a child. I'm assuming she's a child. I don't know exactly where these characters are from, but from what I understand of like the signals I'm getting here, this is like a child, or like his little sister or daughter or something similar to that. But for me, this arms feel like really, really long. But that's just more my perception. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I think it is too long, or at least bent in an odd way. That might be the shoulder plate that's throwing me off a bit, but I don't know for sure. One other thing is that the ear itself is very bent in. It's like there's just a hole there. Like, ears don't do that. Ears have a little more light inside of them because they're not quite like that. I would add some light in the ear, not quite as dark as that, so that way the ear looks more like an ear and less like a hole that goes into their head. And the last thing I'd like to draw attention to is the chin and the nose before we get into the shading bit, because the shading bit's a bit longer. One thing about noses that a lot of people do, which I think is influenced by anime, and before anyone says anything, no, I don't think it's a bad thing that you're influenced by anime with your style, but I do think that in certain cases, the small noses, especially with profile shots, could be quite distracting, and I feel that, like, if people would, like, have a stronger understanding of anatomy, that they would understand that larger noses don't actually take away from a piece, but actually add to it. Like in this case, if his nose was larger, it would really add to his more masculine look, because he's a man, right? And you don't want him having this, like, really tiny, girly baby nose. You want him to have, like, a regular adult nose. Like, not even a manly nose, just an adult nose, because adults have, like, relatively largely sized noses. It doesn't make sense that he has, like, this teeny little Barbie nose. See here, you can see that the size I put it at. It's not, it looks a little odd simply because I've enlarged it, and now the line art is also large, but if I take this away, right, just kind of thin that out there, like that, and then you see me take it on and off. You can see how tiny that nose was. And one other thing, the chin here, you can see how it's shaped. Now, personally, the thing with chins is that I don't like this very pointed chin, because it looks like he doesn't have a jaw. It kind of reminds me of, like, a crescent shape. So, like, when you do jaws, like, or when you do chins, more like, you got to remember that they have to have room for a jaw and a lip and so on, so that when he talks, his mouth opens and other stuff like that. So you have something like this, right? Something like this where, like, the chin is more defined. See, before, after. You can see his profile is much more defined now. His eye shape slightly bothers me, but it's not a tremendous thing. I would enlarge it a little bit and maybe, like, thin it out at the top. But that's just because, like, he'd have to have really thick eyelashes to be having, like, that kind of eye. And he kind of looks, like, more impassioned now. But, again, that's more my preference. You don't have to... I'd like to clarify that if I ever seem like I'm trying to emphasize more my style than, like, actual anatomy quips, then please let me know. But that's simply what I would, like, change about it if it were my own piece. Her profile is actually quite nice. I like how you acknowledge that children have this really rounded jawline and don't have, like, such a strong jawline like he does. He's a man, a grown man, so he has, like, a very square jaw, but her jaw is quite round, and that's really cute, and that really adds to her look. I do feel that, like, see, like, if you take this off, you realize how their noses were almost the same size, even though he's a grown man with a much larger face than she is. And I just feel like this would add more to it. One last thing that I would add to his face to just emphasize it more would be, like, a really nice cheekbone shadow. The reason is because he's obviously, like, a relatively thin person. Like, I googled some pictures of him, and he's, like, a relatively thinnish type person, and he's got a very square jaw, so like it would make sense that his jaw would be, like, emphasized and complemented by a really strong cheekbone. And you can do that very easily by simply finding the cheekbone, which is usually right in between the ear and nose, right? And then just adding a quick shadow there. And if the shadow is too cool or too dark, you can bring up the saturation of your shadow right here and make it match the skin more, something like that. And you can always, like, make it less, you know, like that. And it shapes his face and just overall brings out the thing. So before, after. You can really see the difference that the freckles made when you made them more spacious and really blended them up on the face instead of keeping them kind of flat. And you can see the difference that his larger nose made. His face just overall looks more proportionate to hers because he's clearly an adult, but, like, before, it's like his face was fighting to have the same proportions as hers was, even though he's clearly an adult with a much larger head than hers. This over here is the other fixed version I did. Unfortunately, I lost the commentary I had over this footage as I was explaining it, but I'm going to play the footage for you now, sped up, with my commentary over it, so you can kind of understand what I was going for when I was doing this. Again, I apologize for my incompetence with the microphone. That was a one-time thing, and I'm going to make double sure every time I do it to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and I'm tremendously sorry. So basically here, I took the background and I took away the light behind them because that would be confusing to the light that I wanted to put above them. Again, I chose a light above them to be the single light source because I wanted to, I felt that was the intention that you were going for, but that you separated the background from the light source. The background and the light source should have something to do with each other. Solid color backgrounds are a thing, but when you take that and then you put like a really bright light source behind, it really does confuse the eye, and it's better that you use a single flat color or emphasize the light that you're going to do with a background that's simple, like a single light beam, which is what I'm going to be doing here. I begin shading it with a very warm color. I chose a dark brown, slightly red core color. The reason is because that's the color that blends in with most things, but because their skin colors are so cool and are more within a blue-gray hue, I eventually do change this and I go with a more purple, violet which goes more with their clothing and still accentuates their clothes. Of course, you can't go with a single color to shade all of this, so in the end I eventually change it back to a warmer color so that way their skin doesn't look pale, opaque, or sick. The reason why I went with such a strong light source and a strong shadow is because that's the easiest way to start, and eventually you gradually start pulling back and then going back with like less strong light sources and more easy sources of light, which won't look as strong, because when you have such a strong light source you could really get good with knowing where shadows go and knowing where the light's supposed to be and knowing where it's not supposed to be, and then eventually you can draw back. And I want this to be a reference for you because this is actually quite a beautiful piece and it's very moving, but when you have such a confusing light source situation going on, it's very hard to appreciate that, so it's better to just have the one light source for this instance and then pull it back in the future and do others with less light sources. I'm slightly concerned that my recording over the footage will not fully explain what I mean by localized lighting and overall shading and single light source and other things like that, so I'm going to better explain it through a commentary example with this sphere. Now this sphere is what we call a flat color. It has no shading. If I take off the shadow, it just looks like a circle. It has no illusion of being 3D. It just looks like a circle shape. It has no illusion. The only thing that's giving it an illusion of shape right now is the shadow I placed underneath it. Now, localized shading is a term that I've put upon it, but I don't know the formal term. I will correct myself in the future when I go over the subject again. But basically, localized shading is when someone will do something like this, where they kind of shade around an object like this, and then they'll erase around it and kind of just put the shadow around it and maybe have a little less up here, and then they'll have like a really strong light right here, something like that, or they'll have like little like lights like this or something, where it's like little lights like this or something, but then they'll wonder why their ball doesn't look as spherical as it could be. Now the reason is because you've taken a shadow, right, or you've placed shading on something, but there's no strict light source, and the light source doesn't make sense, because if the light source was coming from, let's say, this direction, right, and the light source was coming from here, then why is there a shadow here as well? Why is there a shadow in this area? There shouldn't be a shadow here if the light source is right here and it's reflecting on this end of the ball. And if this is the reflected light, that's the light bouncing off the ground coming up, then why is it so strong all the way up here? Like, there's a lot of weirdness going on with this light thing I've created here, which doesn't explain why the light looking the way it was, which is why your brain looks at it and is confused and saying that doesn't look like a sphere. Like, if you look here in this picture, for example, the light source is not quite as confusing, but there's a good deal of odd light source bouncing going on. Like, you could look at this and then say, okay, the light source is coming from relatively up here, something right there, right? Now, if you were to point down, you would say, okay, if the light source is coming from here, then why is there a light here? There should be a shadow here because that's under her chin. Why is there light here? And the same thing here. There's also light here. And there's also light here. It should be blocked by his head because the light's up here. And then you have this whole cheek which is completely exposed, even though if this was his cheek, there should only be light here and not light on this underside because he has a cheekbone. Same thing with her. There should only be light here. Why is there light here? And then the same thing here. This is a reflective object. It's armor. But yet you have light here, here, and down here. Reflective objects should reflect something, but yet this object seems like it's full of light and quite opaque. It's almost like it's a matte kind of armor with no shininess to it, and I don't think that was your intention, because you could really put a really strong gleam here, and here, and here, like you were trying to imply that it was really shiny. And then here you have light coming here, even though this is a scarf that's under her arm. This shouldn't have any light at all. And then you have this bit, which has light, but then if this is cloth, right? But cloth is not the same material as metal. Why does the metal have exactly the same amount of light sourcing as the cloth does? You have to consider the texture and density of an object when you give it light, because something like metal that's extremely reflective will be much brighter, or at least be much more contrasted with light, than something like cloth. Another example here. This thing is brighter than the metal is, even though this is cloth. There's just a lot of weirdness going on with the light source. And then over here, you see this light over here, when on the bandanas, there shouldn't be any light, because the light isn't actually touching the bandanas at all. Because the light source is, again, here, and it should be blocked by their heads. what I did down here with my edit was I took, I interpreted the light source that you were trying to do. I'm not sure if you meant the light source to be between them, but for now I went with the light source being above them, since most of the shadow is implied, and made it stronger. The light is coming from the top slightly forward. That's why there's only light on their cheeks, and on their nose, and on their lip, and on their chin. Here on their chin and lip, and here on the armor, here on the armor, and here on the arm, and here, and on the cloth there is a little bit. There's not as much light here under the scarf. There's light here on the ear because the ears are jutting out. There's a lot of light in the hair because the hair is also a reflective object. There is light here on the bandana, but it's coming from the reflection of the light past them because the bandana is jutting forward on the side of the arm. Like, the light is where it should be. You don't want confusing light sources, or else you have all this problem with the eye getting confused and the object looking rather flat. You were telling me about how you were confused with the shading, but like how you couldn't put the light in the right area. Just a few things that I would recommend would be doing things like this. This, of course, is incorrect, and it was done that way on purpose, but a good exercise to help you master shading is to choose an object, a simple object like a cube, a sphere, or maybe even a triangle, and then study that object and study shading that object and choosing only one singular strong light source. I say a single light source because in real life all objects have many light sources. You could have an object on a window, but then you have the reflected object's light from the table, other light sources, and so on. But you want to practice shading an object with a strong light source, because then you can work with mastering that one light source and really making sure that object gives off the illusion that it is lighted and that it does have light. And the best way to do this is through practicing with simple objects, because simple objects make up more complicated objects. And if you can master shading a simple object, you can master shading a more complicated object. And when we shade people, we're kind of at a disadvantage because skin is one of the more difficult things to shade, because skin is not like any other textured object out there. It's not like clay where it simply takes in the light, but it's very opaque. It's actually quite luminous sometimes. But it's not quite like other luminous objects like silk or something, because it's not quite as reflective. And skin allows light to penetrate it and also bounce around inside of it. There's a lot of stuff going on when you do skin, and you really have to watch out, because you could make the character look like the skin is flat. The biggest mistake I see is that people shade their skin or shade everything exactly the same way, even if there's several different like actual things inside of the shape. You want to make sure that doesn't happen, so that way you can actually like shade things differently and give off the illusion of different objects, because metal's not going to reflect the same way a cloth does, skin's not going to reflect the same way that porcelain does, and you have to create that difference, because that way your people can look at this and be tricked into thinking that the object is actually there. Something my professors in college told me, which I think is a very interesting way to put art, is that you are a trickster. You are a trickster who is trying to trick people into seeing your art and thinking that it's actually there. Now, this is a very broad description, because I'm sure some people don't actually want people to think their art's there, but it's more like a stylized, beautiful rendition that people can appreciate. But when it comes to shading, and you want to shade well, that's what you're aiming for. You want to trick people into thinking that it's actually there, that the object is there, and that it's tricking you. See here, if you compare this to this, you see how the shadow didn't make sense, how this light here didn't make sense, and how the light was just all over the place. But now this is much more focused. You can say that yes, the light source is up here. The light is reflecting most strongly on this little dot here. That's why there's like this one little glimmer of light right there. You can say that yes, the light is so strong that it's coming down off the table, that's white as well, and reflecting only slightly on this upper side. Only slightly. That little yellow, that little white line here does a lot for a globe, especially. And this very dark shadow here is the middle ground for this darker shadow here. I created a diagram for shading spheres and for shading in general, which I will link in the description. But that's basically my point with this. I would happily answer any other questions that anyone has on this, and please let me know if my long exposition on shading was confusing. I hope this was helpful to you. Thank you so much for submitting this to me. This episode is going to drag on much longer than my other episodes, and I do apologize for that. And if the wonky editing or the constant date changing becomes an issue, I would just like to clarify that it's because this week has been extremely hectic. I've been doing an art sale and a bunch of other stuff this week, and I got disorganized and I messed up the first episode, so that was all my fault. I'm sorry that you had to put up with such an odd episode today, and I hope that it was helpful to you at least a little bit. And I'm going to try and improve the quality of the series as I go on, learning a bit as I go. Every episode I will do my best to improve and make sure that it's more entertaining. Thank you all for watching. I hope this was helpful. Any suggestions, critiques, or anything you want just let me know in the comments. If you want to submit your artwork to this series, please go to the link in the description like I indicated in the beginning. If you have any other questions for me, please let me know. And feel free to submit your artwork to me. I accept everything except anything that isn't PG-13, simply because I want to keep the show as family friendly as possible. And I hope that I can be helpful in the future. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.